and to disenfranchise voters. That's what this election is about. This is designed to keep Democrats in power for 100 years. And it is fundamentally corrupt.
Senator Ted Cruz there yesterday pushing back on the Democrat election bill S1 that's being taken up by the Senate. Cruz also pointing out that Republicans never tried to change the way we vote when they enjoyed a much larger majority. And Senator Cruz joins us to talk about all this. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time.
Good evening. Good to be with you, Rob.
Yeah, so you're used to being attacked by the left. I know that. MSNBC's Joy Reid makes some of the dumbest comments on TV we ever hear. She's certainly fun to pay attention to. She recently said this about you. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
Ted Cruz says a lot of stupid things. I think that this, what you see here on your screen, is what Republicans fear in the voting booth, and they're going to do everything they can to make sure it doesn't happen, including, you know, Stephen from Django Unchained, a.k.a. Ted Cruz, who's working to stop fellow people of color from voting, which is amazing.
I mean, she's essentially calling you a race traitor for wanting secure elections in the United States. What's your response to Joy Reid?
Well, look, unfortunately, the left regularly traffics in racism and bigotry, and their view is that any minority, I'm Hispanic, if you're African American, you are not allowed to disagree with your leftist overlords. You must obey their orthodoxy or they will ridicule you, they'll attack you, they'll mock you. And I got to say, the left really is quite comfortable with seeing that kind of bigotry play out. They're also, the left is all about power. The reason she's so worked up about this bill is this bill, H.R. 1, many are calling it the Corrupt Politicians Act, is all about the Democrats seizing power and keeping power for the next 100 years. And for MSNBC, it's all about ensuring that Biden, Schumer, and Pelosi can never, ever, ever be beaten. And this is a bill that undermines the heart of our democratic system by taking away your right to vote and by dramatically increasing voter fraud and right. illegal voting in elections.
Yeah, and the funniest thing to me is you listen to what she says, and again, she says a lot of dumb things. That's her shtick. But the vast majority of Black Americans support voter ID laws, which to me is the funniest part of the whole conversation, and nobody ever says that to her.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So you look at what the Corrupt Politicians Act does. It federalizes elections across this country, and it strikes down almost every reasonable voter integrity law. So you just mentioned voter ID laws. 29 states across the country, quite reasonably, have implemented voter ID laws. In Texas, if you want to vote, you got to show a picture ID. The Corrupt Politician Act strikes every one of those laws down. And what you said is exactly right. 75% of Americans support voter ID laws. 60% of Democrats support them, and about 60% of African Americans support them.
Right.
But the Democrats strike every one of them down. Likewise, 31 states prohibit or restrict ballot harvesting, sending paid operatives to collect other people's ballots because it is such an open invitation to fraud.
Right, of course.
The Corrupt Politicians Act strikes every one of those laws down.
It's common sense, and I think everybody sees that. They want to win. Obviously, they're going to play. They're going to say whatever they have to try and win this thing. Does this go anywhere? I mean, are Manchin and Sinema secure in keeping this from becoming law?
Well, you've put your finger on the right question. It all comes down to the filibuster. And Manchin and Sinema are the only two Democrats who have the courage to stand up and say no right now. There are 48 Democrats that are perfectly prepared to end the filibuster. If Manchin and Sinema give in, they will pass the Corrupt Politicians Act. So I got to tell you, Rob, I am concerned. I am very worried. I've served 9 years with Joe Manchin. He's a very nice guy. He's a very affable guy. I've never seen him once stand up to Chuck Schumer in any instance where his vote was the deciding vote and it mattered. And so if past history is any indication, the most likely outcome is that Manchin and Sinema are going to roll over and let Schumer ram this through. And I can tell you this, I'm doing everything I can to lead the fight against it, because this is all about stealing your right to vote, and it's about Democrats wanting to stay in power. You know, Schumer, at the markup we had yesterday, he gave this self-righteous speech about Jim Crow and the eyes of history being on us. And I spoke shortly after he did, and I said, you know what? Schumer's right. Jim Crow was racist. It was bigoted. It was a sorry chapter in our nation's history. And Jim Crow laws were written by Democratic politicians. They were enforced by Democratic politicians. And their objective was to keep those Democratic politicians in office. That's the same thing Schumer and the Democrats are trying to do now with the Corrupt Politicians Act. This is Jim Crow 2.0. This is about taking away the right of the voters to throw the bums out. And it's the most dangerous piece of legislation before the U.S. Congress.
We'll see how this turns out. You make me nervous, though, talking about Manchin and Sinema, though. I thought that was a little bit more secure. I guess it's not. We're going to have to follow it. In the meantime, the Biden administration, has this mess on its hands. We're watching this Colonial Pipeline hack has led to this major gas shortages all throughout the Southeast, up to Virginia. You've got these long lines. This is North Carolina here on the screen. People waiting in line for gas. It's just not a good time. In the meantime, U.S. inflation soars in April to a 13-year high, according to the Consumer Price Index. A lot of people tried to pretend that inflation isn't a big issue. The White House wanted you to think it's nothing. The hack, I can understand. The hack of the pipeline, you can't put that on Biden. That could have happened to anybody. But gas prices were going up before that happened. And inflation is another major issue from printing all this money and handing it out. What do you make of all this?
Well, look, we're 4 months into the Biden presidency. We already have a border crisis at our southern border. We've got a gas crisis. It looks like we're on the verge of an inflation crisis, and there's a war in the Middle East, and this is 4 months into it. Every one of those is the direct cause of failures of the Biden administration, of extreme political decisions. And I got to say, it's striking. In 4 months, they've managed to mess up domestic policy, economic policy, and foreign policy. It's a dangerous time, and unfortunately, it's going to get more dangerous. Here's the good news. The more extreme they get, the more likely we are to move back towards sanity and to have a very good election in 2022 and a very good election in 2024.
That might be the only upside to this whole mess, I guess. Senator Ted Cruz, sir, thank you so much for taking the time. Always good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, where real news for real people.